Hamlet today. This is on page 1238 in the 11th edition. In the 11th edition. Couple of kind of introductory comments. Be sure to read the introduction, which talks about revenge tragedy. It mentions Thomas Kidd and the Spanish tragedy. That's a G. His play, The Spanish Tragedy. Revenge tragedy is exactly what it sounds like. At the beginning of the play, you have the ghost of a dead family member speak to a living family member that he or she was killed and is calling upon the living family member to get revenge or to avenge the ghost's death. Usually within the course of the play, one or more characters either go mad, crazy, or they feign or pretend madness or craziness. And in the achieving of the vengeance or revenge, you end up with death, okay? If you think back to what we said about tragedy in the Greek context, in those plays, any kind of violence happened off the stage, okay? When Oedipus gouges his eyes out, the audience does not see that. When Jocasta kills herself, audience doesn't see that, happens off the stage. By the time you get to the Roman period and the Roman tragedies, and the big writer of revenge tragedies in ancient Rome, a guy named Seneca, you got bodies and death galore on the stage, okay? By the time you get to Shakespeare, I think I counted up in my head for my class yesterday, within the course of the play, you get you get 9 people dead, okay? At the end of Act 5, 4 of those corpses are on the stage. So, a lot of death, right? Shakespeare's Hamlet was first produced in 1600. It was first published about 1603, but it was first produced in 1600. We don't know why or what led or spurred Shakespeare to do this play, but beginning around 1600, maybe 1599, hold on just one second. Yeah, about 1599. Shakespeare writes in 1599, Julius Caesar. It's not the first of his tragedies. He's written some other tragedies earlier. But around 1599, 1600, he starts turning towards darker issues and themes. The period from about 1600 to 1606, you get Hamlet, Macbeth, Lear, Othello, and a couple of other pretty important tragedies. Remember, his son dies, I believe it is 1599. I think that's right. It might be 96. I might be inverting my 6 and 9s there, okay? So they first produced Hamlet in 1600. It's thought that between this, which I'm going to talk about, and this, there's another version. The source for Hamlet, as for all of Shakespeare's plays, isn't just Shakespeare's own imagination. He doesn't just come up with it out of thin air. There's a Danish writer named Saxo Grammaticus, you don't need to know that, I'm just giving it out, who wrote a history of the Danish peoples, essentially. And in that is a story about a prince named Ambleth. Ambleth. Okay, this you do need to know. And that story is essentially the story of our Hamlet. The prince is named Ambleth. His father is murdered. His father's kingship is taken over by his uncle. Okay, but it's not a play. It's not a tragedy. It's about that kind of dynasty. This story, it's thought, probably dates back to, or the source of the story. It's thought that Ambleth was a real character. Probably dates back to around the 800s, 8th to 9th century, 700s, 800s. Okay. So what's between this and this? It's thought that probably sometime in the mid to late, gotta get my numbers right here, 16th century, so the late 1500s, 1550s to the 1580s, there was some kind of play, Hamlet, circulating, not Shakespeare's. And that Shakespeare had access to this, and it gave him the source material for his Hamlet. It's called an Hamlet. Means means source. It's never been found. That is, no earlier English version of the story of Hamlet has ever been discovered. Okay? Now, when Shakespeare writes this, as I mentioned, it's a revenge tragedy. He's writing it kind of at the real tail end of the popularity of this kind of story, that is, revenge tragedies. Revenge tragedies reached their peak in terms of popularity. They were the things people wanted to go to the theater to see in the late 1580s, early 1590s. I don't remember if your book gives a date for Thomas Kyd's. Yeah, 1587 for Spanish tragedy. That was written at the height of being in vogue, of being really popular. So Shakespeare doesn't write Hamlet, produce Hamlet, till 13 years after that. Okay, but his Hamlet has a lot more depth, for example, than does Thomas Kyd's Spanish tragedy. Spanish tragedy is just a straightforward slash and burn. You killed my father, I'm going to kill you, and everything happens. Hamlet is much, much more than that. Hamlet uses that kind of as a scaffolding to build upon. And what Shakespeare wants to build upon are some ideas. This is probably one of the most philosophical of Shakespeare's plays, and it's definitely the most religious. Throughout this play, you're going to see a mixture, because I'm going to beat it into your heads. Here, we're going to pull it out of the text, because it's in there. There's a mixture of Catholic and Protestant thinking. Why? Because this is the period in English history where you have Catholics and Protestants fighting each other. Or, take that back. You don't have Catholics and Protestants fighting each other. You have the crown that is Protestant. I mean, just 5 years before this, Queen Elizabeth was burning people at the stake for being Catholic. I mean, English Parliament passed laws with the support of Elizabeth that in the 1580s made it an offense punishable by capital punishment to be a Catholic priest in England. Not to be celebrating the Mass, just to merely be a Catholic priest within the borders of England was caused to be executed. Okay, and that's because I didn't get into this in my classes yesterday, so I shouldn't here, but I will. That's because in 1588, you had the Spanish Armada. Spain launched a naval invasion of England, but it didn't succeed. It was destroyed by a hurricane. They sent out over 300 galleons, and I think it is only 50 or 60 returned to port. English didn't have to fire a shot. They were literally destroyed by the winds. That pretty much turned all of England against Catholics. Okay? So things started turning very badly for Catholics at that point. Rest of this we'll talk about as we get into the play. So, one thing to take note of. Page 1238, you have your dramatis personae. Okay? Look at the names. Almost all of them are Roman or Latinate, with a few exceptions. Hamlet is not, Hamlet's Germanic. Gertrude is not, Gertrude's Germanic. Rosencrantz, Guildenstern, those are Germanic. Osric is Germanic. Pretty much all the others are Roman or Italianate, Latinate, okay? It's just kind of interesting. So the play is set in the country of Denmark. Its specific location, Act 1, we're told scene Denmark, and then we're told Elsinore, a platform before the castle, okay? Platform, level space on the battlements of the royal castle at Elsinore. The castle is not named Elsinore. I tell you right now, there's going to be a quiz, and the quiz is going to be something like, where's the play set? Okay? It may be more specific. It may say, where in Denmark is the play set? The answer is Elsinore. If you say at the castle named Elsinore, that's wrong, because the castle isn't named Elsinore, all right? Similarly, if you Google it, your first Google response will be wrong, more than likely. At least the last few times I've taught this course where I've used a similar quiz. I think the one I've got this semester is different. You know, everybody did the Google thing and it had the entirely wrong answer, okay? So don't trust Google. So the scene is at Elsinore, which is a town on the coast, okay? And there's a castle, and it opens on a platform before the platform probably just means a battlement, okay? Where people are up off the regular surface of the ground, get a longer view, get a perspective. Why? Because it's going to open with a couple of watchmen. We're told, enter Bernardo and Francisco, 2 sentinels. What are sentinels? Soldiers. What is a sentinel's duty? You're standing watch. Standing watch, I mean, the term standing watch implies what? You're keeping a lookout. You're watching in case something happens. So, we get introduced with the first question of the play, the first words of the play. Who's there? Someone is watching. Someone's observing. You could even extrapolate at this point and say someone is spying. Not spying trying to get trade secrets, spying, keeping an eye out, looking at others. This is going to become probably the dominant image in the play. Watching, looking, observing, okay? At one point, Ophelia is going to call Hamlet the observed of all observers. That is, the thing focused on by everybody who's focusing on everybody else, okay? So, Bernardo comes out. Who's there? Francisco. Nay, answer me. Stand and unfold yourself. Why the nay, answer me, stand and unfold yourself? Well, here's the stage. Here are the 2 doors entering into the stage. One probably comes out here and the other comes out here. They're not coming out together. It's like they can't see each other. And some productions you'll see, you know, the fog machines are going so that there's billowing clouds of fog and such. Who's there? Bernardo asks. Francisco, answer me. Okay? Unfold yourself. Be on time or don't show up. Okay? Not going to open it anymore. Long live the king. What's the long live the king? Password, watchword. It's the indication we're cool. I'm not anybody to be afraid of. Francisco, Bernardo, is that you? Why does he ask the question? Because he can't see him. Okay? You come most carefully upon your hour. In other words, your time, man, it's almost up. You should have been here earlier. He says the clock's just struck 12, indicating that's the time for him to take watch. Go to bed, Francisco. Francisco, for this relief, much thanks. That is, for relieving me of duty. Cold. We're going to find out why it's so cold in a couple of pages. The time of year. It's Christmas time. It's the season of nativity. 'Tis bitter cold, and I am sick at heart. There's a difference between bitterly cold and being sick at heart. Sick at heart does not refer to a physical ailment. Something's bothering him. Something's going on that has Francisco troubled. Bernardo, have you had quiet guard? Has everything been quiet and calm? He goes, not a mouse stirring. That's the source of the phrase, nothing was stirring, not even a mouse. So Bernardo says, good night. If you meet Horatio Marcellus, the rivals of my watch, bid them make haste. That is, they're supposed to watch with me. Tell them to hurry. Why? Bernardo doesn't want to be there alone. Francisco was there alone, but Francisco wasn't pulling the midnight shift. Horatio Marcellus come in. Okay. They probably use passwords also. We are friends to this ground, and liegemen to the Dane. That is to the king of the Danes. Okay. So Francisco leaves, and then Horatio comes in. They welcome him. I'm not going to open anymore if you guys are late. Horatio comes in, and Marcellus asks Bernardo, has this thing appeared again tonight? Whatever this thing is, that's probably the cause of Francisco's being sick at heart, being troubled. We don't know what this thing is yet. Marcellus. Horatio says, 'tis but our fantasy. Remember Theseus's comments about fantasy and imagination. It's our fantasy. It's our imaginations playing tricks with us. You know, you got the swirling fog, and you can suddenly look like a body or a form. Horatio says, 'tis but our fantasy, and will not let belief take hold of him, touching this dreaded sight, twice seen of us. How did Hippolyta respond to Theseus's whole dissertation on imagination and fantasy and such? He says that the strange things that the lovers talk about was all imagination. They were seeing things. After he gives that speech, she says, yeah, but they all saw the exact same thing. You can't attribute that to imagination. Okay? Horatio, we're told, won't let belief, notice, take hold of him. Of this thing that we've seen twice now. And we're going to be told it was seen the previous night and the night before that. Okay? Why doesn't Horatio believe them? Think back to a good man is hard to find. In the grandmother's conversation with the misfit. Last page. The misfit says, Jesus thrown everything off. Why is the misfit the misfit? He tells us. Because he wasn't there. In other words, he talks about Jesus raising people from the dead. And he says, and it wasn't right. I wasn't there. And if I'd been there, I wouldn't be the way I am now. Why? because if he'd been there, then he would have known. But he doesn't know because he wasn't there, because he didn't see Jesus raise anybody from the dead. All right? The misfit's point is he lacks belief. And I think I mentioned this when we were talking about that story. One of the disciples doesn't believe Jesus is raised from the dead. Thomas. I think it is a week after the resurrection. The 10 are gathered together in a room. Jesus appears, shows himself to them. Thomas isn't there. The next day, Thomas is with them. They tell him, we've seen the Lord, etc., etc. Thomas says, unless I see him, put my finger in the hole in his hands or my hands in his side, I will not believe. Jesus taps him on the shoulder. He suddenly appears, taps him on the shoulder. Says, and Thomas does, and Thomas replies, my Lord and my God. This is all getting to a point. Jesus says, blessed are you who have seen and believed, but more blessed are those who haven't seen and believed. In other words, if the misfit believed, he would be more blessed than the apostles who saw and believed. Okay? Horatio doesn't believe because he hasn't seen it. Some say that Horatio is a Stoic. Stoic is a Roman belief system. It's a philosophical system that essentially says, you want to be happy in life. You want to find the key or the secret to happiness. It's real easy. One, know you've got to die. Everybody dies. There's no escaping death. Two, nothing happens when you die. That is, there's no punishment, there's no reward. There's no afterlife. There's no God, there's no devil. You just stop. Okay? None of that helps you be happy in this life. The way you're happy in this life is to try to live as evenly as you can. Don't have these great highs. Don't have these deep lows in your life. Don't get really super happy. Don't get really super sad. Just kind of go on an even, smooth sailing. That's the key to happiness. All right? If Horatio is a Stoic, then there's no belief in God, there's none of that, there's no hell, etc. So, he won't believe unless he's seen what they've seen. So, Marcellus says, because he won't believe, that's why I've invited him to come along. I want him to see it. Horatio, it will not appear. Why won't it appear according to Horatio's thinking? Because it's not real. Okay? Bernardo, sit down. Let us assail your ears. We're going to tell you what we've seen twice now. Okay? He says, okay, speak, Bernardo. And so Bernardo looks at the sky and says, well, you see where that star is right now? He says, when that same star was where it is right now, the bell then beating 1, and the ghost comes in. At this same time yesterday, the ghost comes in. Peace, break thee off. In other words, shut up. Here it is, Bernardo, in the same figure, like the king that's dead. In the same, what does he mean by figure? Form, shape. And then he gives a simile. Like the king that's dead. What does like mean? Or let me rephrase that. What does it not mean? If it's like the king that's dead, then it's not the king that's dead. He's comparing the two. But it's not the king that's dead. Why? Because the king's dead and ghosts aren't real. Everybody knows it. Looks like him, but this is going to be important in just a few minutes. Marcellus, thou art a scholar, speak to it, Horatio. Now you got to long gloss about Horatio being a scholar. Scholar there just means he's a student. He's a student at the same university that Hamlet is a student at. All right? And because he's a student at the university in the Middle Ages, he speaks Latin, because that's all that was spoken of, all that was spoken in the universities. That was the language every lecture was performed in. It's what they wrote in, right? Your gloss goes on to say, however, goes on to talk about exorcisms. There's nothing in this passage that is suggesting that Horatio is going to exorcise this what? What do you exorcise? Not exercise. What do you exorcise? Cast out. Demons. Fallen angels. Okay? There's nothing at this point that suggests that's what this is. I think all Marcellus really means is, you're smarter than I am, you speak to it. Because Marcellus is what? He's a soldier. He's not a university student. Bernardo. So, Bernardo first says, in the same figure like the king that's dead. Then Bernardo says, looks are not like the king. Doesn't he look like the king? Mark it. That is, notice it, Horatio. Pay attention. Look at all the details. Horatio, most like. If anything ever looked like the king, that does. It harrows me with fear and wonder. Your gloss, harrows, lacerates the feelings. What does it mean to lacerate something? Anybody know? You get in a knife fight. Somebody swings a knife, cuts it across your arm. That's a laceration. You fall, hit your head on something like this, cut your head open. That's a laceration. How do you lacerate feelings? How do you take a knife to feelings? It's an idiotic gloss. It's not what harrows means. Harrows is a theological term. Okay? Goes back to the early church. One of the early creeds of the church, a statement of belief, said that when Jesus was in the tomb, when the body was dead, Jesus' soul, his spirit, went down to Hades and brought up the souls of the righteous to be with him in heaven, beginning with Adam. They were all Hades means is a place of death. It's not the popular idea of hell, burning fire and all that kind of, it's just where the dead go, all right? That's called the harrowing of hell. It's bringing the souls out. It harrows me. He's saying, this is scaring the hell out of me. This is like nearly killing me, making me die with fear and wonder. If this goes on much longer, I'll be scared to death. Bernardo, it would be spoke to. You got a gloss down there. A ghost could not speak until spoken to. Okay, possibly. Or it could just mean somebody speak to it. So, Horatio addresses the ghost. What art thou that usurps this time of night, together with that fair and warlike form, in which the majesty of buried Denmark did sometimes march? By heaven I charge thee, speak. Whole bunch there in those little 4 lines. So, what's the first word he says? What? Not who. What are you? Because what could it be? Might be a ghost. English popular belief at this time believed in the reality of ghosts. Might be a spirit, meaning not a human spirit, a demon-like spirit. English popular belief at the time totally believed in demons and false spirits. Okay? So, what art thou that usurps this time of night? What does it mean to usurp something? If one of you suddenly got up, came up here, decked me, knocked me out, and started teaching the class, you would be usurping this position. You would be taking it over. That's what it means, to take control of. If you read about a carjacking, the car's been usurped by the person doing the jacking, okay? That's all it means, taking. So what's being usurped? This time of night, Horatio is suggesting. Why? Because this time of night belongs to the sentinels. They're the only ones who should be up. Where are ghosts supposed to be? Where are the spirits of the dead supposed to be? With the dead. Either in heaven or in hell in the Christian system. Okay? So that's the first line. Together with that fair and warlike form, in which the majesty of Barry Denmark did sometimes march. See, that's also being usurped. The form, the image. You could probably even go as far as to say the body, so to speak. Just not the physical, the appearance of it. That has been usurped. It's been taken control of. Okay? So what are you? That look like the dead king. By heaven I charge thee, speak. Let's go back for a minute. If he's a Stoic, he doesn't believe in heaven. Because by saying by heaven, that's like saying Washington, D.C. said, or the White House says. It's a figure of speech, okay? Taking the part for the whole. Heaven is the place of God. By heaven I charge thee means by God I charge you. But if he's really a Stoic, he doesn't believe in God. Here's why Shakespeare probably does that. Let's assume for a moment he is a Stoic. If he doesn't believe in God, what good is it going to do to say, by God I charge you? If you don't believe, quote unquote, if you don't believe in Jesus, what good is it going to do you if you go to someone that you believe is possessed by a demon, say, by Jesus, in Jesus' name, it's not going to do any good. In fact, you have an account in the Gospels where, not in the Gospels, in the book of Acts, where someone tries to cast out a demon. And the someone who does that isn't Christian. They don't believe in Jesus yet. And the demon says, Paul I know, Jesus I know, you I don't know. Who are you to be commanding me to do something? Okay. Another illustration. In the Gospels, Jesus sends out 70 of his disciples in groups of 2. He sends them out to the cities and towns. Okay? They come back, and some of them say, there were these people that were possessed that we couldn't do anything about. We tried commanding them in your name to leave. And Jesus said, these kind can only go out, 2 different accounts, by faith and fasting, or by prayer and faith and prayer, or prayer and fasting. You got to have faith in order to call on that name, so to speak. Does he? Does the ghost speak? Nope. Could be because of Horatio's lack of faith. It could also be because the ghost doesn't care what Horatio says. So, we're told, however, by Marcellus, it is offended. It's a stage direction. Because then we hear Bernardo say, see, it stalks away. If I were directing this, I would have Marcellus say, it is offended as the ghost does one of 2 things. Turns its back on Horatio and starts to walk away. Or, I would love to see this sometime, gives him the finger. You can't tell me what to do. And then Bernardo says, see, it stalks away. That's a stage direction given verbally. Horatio, stay, speak, speak, I charge thee, speak. And the ghost leaves. So, Bernardo asks, how now, Horatio, you tremble and look pale. Is this not something more than fantasy? Theseus said, fantasy, imagination at night can make a bush look like what? A bear. Just fantasy? What do you think, Horatio? Before my God. Now, to me, that kind of implies he's not a Stoic. He may not be Christian. He might just be a monotheist, like a Jew or a Muslim. Before my God, I might not this believe, and we're back to the misfit, and a good man is hard to find, without the sensible and true avouch of mine own eyes. He means, I would never have believed this unless I'd seen it myself. Okay? Marcellus, is it not like the king? Again, a simile. Doesn't it look similar to the king? Notice Horatio's response. Not a simile. How is it like the king? Horatio says, as thou art like to, I threw in the like, as thou art to thyself. How are you yourself? How are you like yourself? You're not like yourself. You are yourself. What's Horatio's point? That is the king. That's the dead king, guys. That's not something else, pretending to be the dead king. He is as much the dead king as you are to who you are. Such was the very armor he had on when he, the ambitious Norway, combated. So frowned he once, in an angry parle he smote the sledded Pollux on. 'Tis strange. What does he mean? We're not in Kansas anymore, Toto. I mean, this is cue the Twilight Zone music. It's unnatural. So, Marcellus, 2 times before, at the same hour, we've seen him on our watch. Horatio, I wonder why. But in the gross and scope of my opinion, that is, in my opinion, in my expectation, this forebodes some ill for us. It is a portent to an eruption of our state. So, Marcellus says, let's take a seat, and can someone explain why we're keeping watch? Why are we standing sentinel out here when it's freezing cold? Okay. Horatio, oh, I can explain that. And he gives us some background. He gives us some exposition. He says, our dead king, Hamlet Sr., did what? He defeated Fortinbras Sr., the dead king of Norway. Okay? And when he defeated Fortinbras Sr., we got some land. Now, Fortinbras' son, Fortinbras Jr., wants to do what? He wants to prove himself. So, he is saber-rattling against us. What do you do if you're a head of state and a possible enemy saber rattles? You rattle your sabers back. They arm up, you arm up. They bring a shotgun, you bring an AR-15. You bring an AR-15, they bring an Uzi. They bring an Uzi, you bring a howitzer. You keep going up, up, up. Okay? So, he says, young Fortinbras has got us preparing for war. And he mentions Norway. Norway is the term used to describe, in this context, Fortinbras Jr.'s uncle. Why? Because he used the name for the state also to apply to the current king, just like Claudius is going to be referred to as Denmark. Okay? We have a similar situation, partially at least, between the House of Denmark and the House of Norway. In the House of Denmark, in Denmark itself, who's the current king? It's Claudius. We're going to be introduced to in just a moment. It's Claudius. Okay? The former king was Hamlet Sr. In Norway, who's the current king? He's not named. It's just Norway. It's assumed it's Fortinbrand's uncle, just like Claudius is Hamlet's uncle. See, the problem here is in the Germanic system, of which England is part of, because England is the Germanic country, ultimately. How does one become king? By being the eldest son of the previous king, right? And that gets passed on that way on down. There is a little technicality there. They did actually have elections, but the elections were done by the king's advisors, and usually the person elected was the king's son. It was, rubber stamp, all right? So, he says this is what's going on. Bernardo, I think you're right. Line 109. Well may it sort, that is, it may work out in such a way that this portentous figure comes armed through our watch. So like the king that was and is the question of these wars. The dead king's image is what? Still trying to protect his kingdom, as it were. Horatio, a mote it is to trouble the mind's eye. A mote, a speck of dust. I don't know if you've ever had like sand or once when I was a little kid, got sawdust in my eye. So bad I had to wear an eye patch and all that kind of stuff. You get a little piece of dust, a little piece of sand in your eye, and what do? You can't just sit there and try to blink it out, try to get your eye to tear up, or just wash it out. Most people start doing this. And you do what? You just keep rubbing it, and it gets worse and worse. He's saying this, the image of the king, is a speck of dust in the mind's eye. Meaning, it makes the mind do what? Turn all of its attention to it. Why is the king here? Why is the dead king's ghost troubling us? All the attention focuses now on that. And he gives an example of the dangers or the possible dangers confronting Denmark. And he goes back to Roman history. Okay? Just before Julius Caesar fell, the mightiest Julius, the grave stood tenantless, and the sheeted dead did squeak and gibber in the Roman streets. It was a popular belief that a few days before the Ides of March is March 15th, it's this Friday, the dead appeared in Rome. That is, out of their graves. The sun went dark. These were all omens. There's a total solar eclipse coming up, April 8th. Okay? All this weird stuff happened. His point is, and that all pointed to the death of Caesar. Okay? Shakespeare had written, this play's written prior to 1600, first performed 1600. Shakespeare had written in 1595, 97, no, 99. 1599, Shakespeare wrote Julius Caesar. So audiences would have had Caesar, would have been familiar with their minds. Ghost comes back in. And Horatio says, I'll cross it. That is, I'll cross its path. I'll block it. I'm going to make this thing speak to me. And he says 4 different things. Or he gives the ghost 4 opportunities, put it that way. If thou hast any sound or use of voice, speak to me. If you can speak, talk. That's the first one. If there be any good thing to be done, that may to thee do ease and grace to me. Oh, I never thought of that before. That may do ease and grace to me, speak to me. Notice your stage direction off to the side. That's in the text. Speak to me, and we're told it spreads his arms. You've got a gloss. The ghost, or perhaps Horatio, referring to the it. I think, first of all, the gloss is totally wrong. It spreads his arms. So Horatio said, I will cross it. He goes up to the ghost. The stage direction says, it spreads his arms. The easiest reading, according to Occam's razor, the easiest solution is more than likely the right one. It, the ghost, spreads his arms. Is that the ghost arms? If it is, it probably would have said it spreads its arms. It could be the ghost spreads Horatio's arms. What did Horatio say just before that? I'll cross it. If the ghost spreads Horatio's arms like this, it's like, okay, so I'm going to make you into a cross. And then what does Horatio say? If there be any good thing to be done, that may to thee do ease and grace to me. Within the Christian tradition, what is the cross? 1, it's a horrible way of dying. But 2, it's the way, according to Old Testament law and stuff, the Messiah had to die. Why? To bring ease and grace to those suffering. It's a very interesting possibility. Literally never considered that before. So, if there be any good thing to be done, that may to thee do ease and grace to me. Ease. Why does he want to bring ease to the ghost? What do you know about ghosts, if anything? Take Professor Reed's, well, you won't want to since you're taking 2030 now. Take Professor Reed's course on ghost stories. It's a 2020 course. He actually does a walking tour of parts of the campus and such. One of the reasons, popular belief, ghosts come back, they've got unfinished business. Something they haven't done, or, and he alludes to this later, something they've done that they need to undo. Something they've done they need to fix in order to be at peace. So, anything that can do you ease can give you peace. You know, it's what the RIP, Requiescat in Pacem, rest in peace, stands for. And grace to me. That word grace, that is a theological term. It's a Christian terminology term. That is, and bring the favor of God to me. This is all predicated on the line immediately before that. What will bring that grace to me? If I do some good thing. Catholic belief is that good deeds draw down the grace of God upon the doer of the good deed. All right? We don't know if Shakespeare was Catholic or Protestant. His family, historically, was entirely Catholic. If thou art privy to thy country's fate, which happily, foreknowing, may avoid, speak. How would a ghost be privy to the fate of the country? Think time perspective. Which foreknowing implies what about the fate? Hasn't happened yet, right? It's something in the future. So if you know about something that's going to happen in the future that we can avoid, tell me, what's the logical problem with that? Think Oedipus. What is the whole point of Oedipus? You can't change your fate. If it's fate, it's written in stone. Okay? It presumes another question, however. How can the ghost know the future? When, time frame, when do ghosts exist? That is, in what time do ghosts have their existence? They don't. That is, they don't exist in time. Why? Because when they die, they leave time. Time is for those within time, like bodies. The body, let's say of the dead ghost, still exists in time. It's in a grave somewhere. But the spirit has left time, has gone outside of time. We're going to hear a line in a moment about going into eternity. Okay? Remember minister's black veil. The minister says there is a time to come when all of us will have the veils lifted and we will be in eternity outside of time. That's what eternity means. Or, fourth option. Lost my place. If thou hast supported in thy life extorted treasure in the womb of earth, for which they say you spirits oft walk in death, speak. So, if you've uphoarded just means hoarded. If you've hoarded in your life, notice, extorted treasure. If you've somehow stolen treasure from somebody else, if you've somehow forced others to give you their treasure through extortion, blackmail, okay, and it's buried in the earth, for which cause, he says, it said, you ghosts roam the earth. Tell me. Notice, he doesn't say what's going to happen to that treasure. It's implied. One, it's hoarded. If you hoard something, what good does it do? Especially money. It doesn't do you any good at all. No. Jeff Bezos' bank account, Elon Musk's bank account. What, quote unquote, good do they do? They just increase, right? Will Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk ever, well, unless Elon Musk, buys Facebook or something, will they ever be able to spend? No, they won't. The point is, and this is an old idea going back to Old English literature in English society, wealth ultimately is for one purpose. It's not to build more wealth. Wealth is to be shared. It's to be distributed. So that you don't have a filthy rich person and a, dirt poor person. That filthy rich should share that wealth. It's not communist fashion, anything like that. It's willfully doing it, distributing alms and gifts kind of a thing. So, his point is, if you tell me where this is, I'll open it up. I will dig that treasure out and give it away. Okay? You get a little inkling of this, by the way, if you've ever read or even seen A Christmas Carol. What does Ebenezer Scrooge have a lot of? Money. What good does it do him? His dead friend and partner, Jacob Marley, comes to him and says, when Scrooge says, you were always a good businessman. And he says, business? Mankind was my business. In other words, I should have spent more time not counting out my money, but handing out. And that's the whole point of that story. Cock crows. Marcellus says, should I strike it? How do you hit a ghost? Okay, the ghost leaves. And Marcellus says, and it would have been stupid to try to strike it with my, okay? So, they talk about the cock crowing, the rooster crowing. And Horatio says, I've heard it said that when the rooster announces the morning with its crowing, what happens? At his warning, line 156 or so, no, 153 or so, whether in sea or fire, in earth or air, the extravagant and erring spirit hies to his confine. That is, whether the spirit is in the sea, in the fire, in the earth, or in the air, when that rooster crows, that spirit goes to where it is supposed to be. The implication is probably with the body. And then Marcellus says, yeah, and I've heard that at this time of year, Christmas time, what happens? The rooster crows all day long. And because it sings all day and night long, spirits can't leave their bodies. In other words, it's a time of peace on earth. And you could quote the rest of the biblical passage, and goodwill to men. All right? Horatio, yeah, I agree. I've heard that too. Let's go tell Hamlet. But don't tell anybody else about what you've seen. They agree. We get scene 2. So Act 1, Scene 1 starts or takes place on the battlement between the hours of 12 and 1 in the morning. Act 2, we're not told when it occurs, but the implication is probably the next morning. Okay? We're told a room of state in the castle. What in the world does that mean? It's like the East Room in the White House. That's where they hold big ceremonies. State dinners, all that kind of stuff. It's like the dining room in Buckingham Palace. Buckingham Palace, the dining room, has a table, if I remember correctly, that will seat 100 people. This thing is just huge, okay? It's literally like the length of one of the hallways in Peck Hall. I mean, the room itself is massive. So there's this highly ornate, heavily decorated room, right? And the king comes in with the queen and all these others. So Claudius, king of Denmark, Gertrude, the queen, counselors, Polonius, his son Laertes. Polonius is the king's right-hand man. He's his chief advisor and counselor. And the king comes in and says, though yet of Hamlet our dear brother's death the memory be green, and that it us befitted to bear our hearts in grief, and our whole kingdom to be contracted in one brow of woe. Yet so far hath discretion fought with nature that we with wisest sorrow think on him, together with remembrance of ourselves. All right? So what's he said? My brother didn't die very long ago. Though yet of Hamlet, our dear brother's death, the memory be green. It's fresh. It's just happened. Interesting question is, how long has Hamlet Sr. been dead? You get conflicting answers with the play. Some say 2 months, some say 4 months. Okay? And so what does he say? Because the memory is green, the entire state is contracted, boiled down to one brow of woe. Thankfully, you guys haven't experienced this, or probably, since the United States hasn't had a major assassination in a long time. Go back to JFK, Martin Luther King Jr., or Bobby Kennedy in '68. Okay? The entire nation mourned for those men's deaths. The entire nation did not love JFK. When JFK won the election in 1960, it was about as close as things get. Everybody, left and right, will tell you today, JFK won because of cheating in Chicago. That's how he got elected. Okay? The nation was really divided. We think, oh, we're so divided today. We're just louder in our division. largely because of these things. It amplifies it, all right? Not everybody loved Martin Luther King, not everybody loved Bobby Kennedy, but everybody, mourned because how they died wasn't right. He's saying Denmark is doing the same thing. And he said, and it's made me think of ourselves. That's the royal we, me. Partly what he's saying here is, just as my brother died, I too will die. This is an example of what's called a memento mori. That literally it means, remember you too must die. Most of us don't like to be reminded of that. All right? So, what does he do? We thought of ourselves. Therefore, our sometime sister, now our queen. What does that mean? I married my dead brother's wife. I think it is something like 47, 48 states in the United States. That's illegal. Why? Because that's considered incest. In the Christian tradition, in the Jewish tradition, Old Testament, it's always illegal and immoral. So I married my dead brother's wife. Why? Therefore, our sometime sister, now our queen, the imperial jointress to this warlike state, have we as 'twere with the defeated joy, with an auspicious and a dropping eye, with mirth and funeral, and with dirge and marriage, and equal scale, weighing delight and dole, taken to wife. In other words, I was sorry and saddened, but I looked at her and said, she's pretty cute, blah, 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 and I lifted myself out of my dole, my sorrow, but also simultaneously in marrying her, the joy and happiness was what? Tempered by the sorrow of my death. Because after all, he couldn't have married Gertrude unless what happened first? Her husband died. Okay? People think, that's crazy. Nobody would ever do that. I'm not talking politics here, okay? Don't get me wrong. Hunter Biden had an affair with his dead brother's wife. Dead after she died. After he died. All right? It happens. And then he says, so, to bring joy out of sorrow, I married Gertrude. Nor have we herein borrowed your better wisdoms. Who's the your? All you people that are here. We haven't borrowed, we haven't disallowed your counsel and advice, which have freely gone with this affair along. You all supported me in this. This would be like his cabinet secretaries. Think of the modern presidency. What's meant by you supported this? I think, I won't say others think this, what Shakespeare's doing here is he's saying Claudius is spreading the blame. If there's something wrong with my marrying my dead brother's wife, it's not just my fault. All of you went along with this. Okay? Hamlet, there's going to be a phrase that's going to come up later on. Something's rotten in the state of Denmark. What's rotten? The state of Denmark. Where's the rot begin? At the head. And if it starts at the head, what does it affect? Everything down from the head. Okay? So, he goes on about young Fortinbras of Norway, rattling his saber. This is why we have the watch going on. And he sends a couple of ambassadors off to Norway. The king, Fortinbras' uncle probably, saying, put a leash on him. Okay? So Cornelius and Voltimand leave. Then he dresses Laertes, his right-hand man's son. And we find out Laertes wants to go back to school, Laertes is a student at the University of Paris. Okay? And he says, your father says you can go? He says, yes, you can. You have my leave. Go. Notice, Laertes needs the king's approval to leave. Okay? Then the king turns towards Hamlet. Again, what is the king's relation to Hamlet? The king's relation to Hamlet is uncle and stepfather. Okay? Hamlet's relation to the king is nephew and stepson. But now my cousin Hamlet and my son. Notice he doesn't say stepson. Why? Because legally he doesn't have to. Legally, Hamlet is now his son. Question, just throwing this out there. How old is Hamlet? We're going to find out in the play. You can blow your mind how old Hamlet is. But now my cousin Hamlet and my son. Hamlet delivers an aside. A little more than kin and less than kind. What is an aside? It's when the character speaks directly to the audience. Okay? Within the fiction of the play, nobody else on the stage hears it. It's not a soliloquy, because a soliloquy occurs when the character is alone on the stage. And in a soliloquy, the words that are said are merely the character thinking out loud. We are taken into the character's mind in a soliloquy. Okay? So, but now my cousin Hamlet and my son. You've got a gloss. Cousin just means any member of the extended family. It could be cousin. It could be third cousin 5 times removed. Okay? It could be nephew, because that's extended family. It's not part of the nuclear family. It's not father, son, mother, daughter, etc. But Hamlet replies, a little more than kin and less than kind. A little more than kin. What does kin mean? It's still referring to family, but kin means we're closer than just cousins, or we're closer than just extended family. You're my father's brother. And now my father. And that's why he says, and less than kind. Kind here means, you've got a gloss, it means unnatural. Okay? How so? Because it is unnatural for you to have married my mother. Because she was my father's wife. It goes against nature, is what he's saying. Okay? So we're closer than just kin. It's like we're more than just, DNA blood relatives. But less than kind. You are less than kind to me. And it does also have that surface meaning of not nice. And with that surface meaning of not nice and unnatural, there's kind of a third possible meaning. Who should be king? According to the law of primogeniture, Hamlet should be king. See, that's another way that Claudius is less than kind, less than natural. Just as the ghost usurped the time of night, Claudius has usurped Hamlet's place as king. So, how is it that the clouds still hang on you? Hamlet, you look down. That's what that means. Why are you so depressed? Not so, my lord. I am too much in the sun. You've got a gloss. Too much in the sun. 1, I am too much out of doors. No, that is not what it means. That is effing ridiculous. Okay? Too much in the sun of your grace. That's closer. Here's the sun. Here's the earth. As the earth moves, what does it do? I mean, it rotates, but it also rotates around the sun. Parts of the earth receive the light of the sun. If we look at the moon, the only reason we can see the moon is what? Because it's reflecting the light of the sun. The only reason we can see any of the planets at night is because they're reflecting the light of the sun. He's saying, I am too much in your orbit. I am too close to you. I'm always in the sun. Louis XIV, King of France, Shakespeare's day or earlier, can't remember, called himself the Sun King because of this belief that the king is the center of everything in society. All right? I am too much in the sun. The Queen finally addresses Hamlet. Good Hamlet, cast thy nighted color off, and let thine eye look like a friend on Denmark. Nighted color. Hamlet's dressed, like this. Nope. Hamlet, throughout the play, dresses all in black. Color of night. Why? Why is the memory of my dear brother's death, green? Because Hamlet Sr. has not been dead very long. What do you wear to a funeral? Black. It's symbolic of mourning. Hamlet is in mourning for his father. Do not forever with thy veiled lids look for thy noble father in the dust. Does that mean Hamlet's down there digging around going, Dad, are you down there? No. It's talking about how he walks. He walks everywhere like this. His head to the ground, his eyes to the ground. So when people come up to him as he's walking, all they see are his eyelids. That's all it's meant. Thou know'st 'tis common. What is the 'tis? What is common? Semicolon. All that lives must die. That's it. It's about the most common thing there is, right? What are the two certainties of life? According to the joke. Death and taxes. Death comes to all. So, she says, thou know'st 'tis common, all that lives must die, passing through nature to eternity. That's why I asked the question, when is the ghost? The ghost exists outside of time, in eternity. Hamlet, I'm Adam, it is common. You're right. Everything does die. If it be, why sings it so particular with thee? And what does Hamlet do? Seems? Seems? Seems. It's a subjunctive verb. It indicates a condition contrary to fact. Okay? He's saying, seems? Nay, it is. That is, it is particular with Hamlet. What is particular to Hamlet? Death. Why? His father just died. He's saying, it is particular with me. Why? Because I am my father's only son, and he is my only father. I am the particular one that it affects in this way. I know not seems. And so he goes on to talk about what may seem. Okay? Major theme in the play. Because again, this refers to what? How one appears. Spying, watching, observing. What do you do when you spy, watch, and observe? You're looking for things that appear. He says, "'Tis not alone my inky cloak, good mother, nor customary suits, clothing, of solemn black, nor windy suspiration of forced breath, sighing." Why? Because when you're full of sorrow, you take a lot of deep breaths. "No, nor the fruitful river in the eye, tears, together nor the dejected behavior of the visage, frowning, lips may be quivering at times, together with all forms, moods, shapes of grief. Shapes. Like giving shape to airy nothing that can denote me truly. Denote. You see, when we get to poetry, one of the words in the book is going to be denotations and connotations. A denotation, the literal dictionary definition of a word. B-L-U-E. Literal dictionary definition is what? It's a color. But you can also be blue, meaning sad. That's a connotation. Hamlet says, all these things, these cannot denote me. Those don't reveal the true me. He says, these indeed seem. They appear. Why? For they are actions that a man might play. If you're watching, you're observing, you're spying, how do you know that someone is pretending? How do you know that someone is acting? How do you know when someone's being real? I mean, that in one sense. We could segue from that and talk about an awful lot of politics. Because that becomes one of the major questions. In any political season, who's the real person behind that quote-unquote candidate? I mean, what's the real, go back 40 years. Who's the real Ronald Reagan? Who's the real Jimmy Carter? Not the one on the stump. The real one, the one inside. Hamlet. But I have that within which passeth show. That is, who? Inside me, these, the clothes, all the other stuff, these are but the trappings and the suits of woe. The woe is that within. What has Hamlet just told us? He is really torn up. He is really suffering. This would be the point, if it were a television show, the credits would roll and they'd say, this is National Suicide Month. If you are feeling, strong feelings of depression, self-harm, blah, blah, call. Okay? The king. 'Tis sweet and commendable in your nature, Hamlet, to give these mourning duties to your father, but you must know your father lost a father. It's sweet, it's right, it's appropriate, Hamlet, that you would mourn your father. But you must know. And he's juxtaposing emotions, mourning duties, with knowledge. All right? Your father lost a father. That father lost, that is your grandfather, he lost his. And the one who survived, what? In filial obligation, that is, you are obliged as a son, what? To, for a period of time, mourn. What's his point? You've gone overboard. You're mourning too long, Hamlet. But to persevere in obstinate condolement, stubborn sorrows, is what obstinate condolement means. It is a course of impious stubbornness. What does impious mean? It goes against God. It's unpious. You're now going against God, Hamlet. What else? It's unmanly grief. Man up, grow a pair, quit acting like a girl. That's what Claudius is telling him. It shows a will most incorrect to heaven. That is, your will opposes God. He's really laying it on thick. A heart unfortified, you're a sissy. You lack courage. A mind impatient, unable to endure. An understanding simple, you're a damn fool and unschooled. You haven't learned. Why? For what we know must be and is as common as any the most vulgar thing to sense, why should we in our peevish opposition take it to heart? You know everything that lives dies. Your father died. Boo-hoo. Suck it up. Go on with life. That's what his point is. But how long has he been dead? That might be appropriate to say after. Pick your time frame. My siblings, much more than I am, because I wasn't around my parents the last years of their lives nearly as much. My siblings, who all lived relatively near them, still now, 9, 8 years after my mom's death, will talk about how much they miss her. I saw my mom maybe 5 times in the last 10 years of her life. I literally don't miss her at all. 2,500 miles. I know, I'm a cold-hearted bastard. His point is, move on, but we don't know how long. The play's going to tell us somewhere between 2 months and 4 months. For most people, not long enough to be telling Hamlet this. Okay? So, he says, we pray you, 106, throw to earth this unprevailing woe. Get rid of it. Why? Because Hamlet, you're next in line. You're going to be king after me. Time for people to see you acting like a king, behaving like a grown man, etc., etc. And moreover, he says, we don't want you to go back to school in Wittenberg. We want you staying here. The implication is so that you can be trained to be king once I die. The queen then begs Hamlet, I pray thee, let not stay with us. Hamlet, I shall in all my best obey you, madam. And the king says, oh, that's a great reply. Be as ourself in Denmark. That is, Hamlet, while you're here, people will treat you like you're the king. All right? They all leave, and Hamlet's left on the stage. Hamlet gets his first soliloquy. And we'll just barely start it, but it's a doozy. I'm going to look just at the first couple lines. No, we're not. We don't have time. This is going to take a while. Okay? Yeah, we'll just stop there. All right, see you on Thursday. Have through Act 2 read for Thursday.